plenty of talk surrounding a new code of ethics that the Supreme Court drafted up for itself, but several of the justices weren't too keen on having their ethics supervised in any sort of meaningful or effective way. A new leak shows which justices in particular fought to keep the code of ethics more what you'd call guidelines. The code, as presented, was 14 pages long, but what was not included in those 14 pages were any rules for enforcement, mechanisms for oversight, or penalties for faltering. And all of that was very intentional. And they knew what they were doing was sneaky because amongst the 9 justices, they kept their memos so confidential that it wasn't even shared via email. They kept the communications in a paper envelope. Anyway, the ones who objected to having an enforceable code of ethics for the 9 are the exact ones that you would have expected them to be. Chief Justice Roberts never wanted a code in the first place, and he said so, but he sort of had to cave to public pressure when all of the Supreme Court kickbacks that had previously been hidden from the public were revealed.
I want to assure people that I am committed to making certain that we as a court adhere to the highest standards of conduct. We are continuing to look at things we can do to give practical effect to that commitment.
In the leaked memos, Neil Gorsuch notably spoke out against having an enforceable code, arguing that it should be up to the individual justice whether or not they want to adhere to the code. He justified this by insisting that giving the justices any kind of guidelines or accountability could threaten their ability to function independently. Unsurprisingly, Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas agreed with him, asserting that the recent criticism that the court has been under was all politically motivated and unfounded, and that the critics are beyond appeasement anyway, so why even bother trying to appease them? So that's 4 conservative justices so far, several of whom have come under fire in recent years for accepting gifts and perks worth millions of dollars from conservative donors. The 3 liberal justices, Elena Kagan, Sonia Sotomayor, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, all wanted an enforceable code. So that leaves Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett of the conservative wing somewhere in the middle, though in their short time on the bench, they haven't proven to be as staunchly partisan as many had expected them to be. Ultimately, the code became more of a way for the justices to just protect themselves further than they already were. In fact, they've used it as a way to insulate themselves from future criticism and scrutiny for things that they've come under fire for in the past. For example, right now in the code, there is no restriction on accepting gifts or other kickbacks, which is very, very convenient for Clarence Thomas. Also, the justices can now use their staff for non-court related activities, something that liberal Justice Sonia Sotomayor was criticized for doing back in 2009. There are no guardrails against bad behavior. In fact, bad behavior is hardly defined within the code. Jackson and Kagan did seek some kind of external enforcement body, maybe perhaps a slate of federal judges, but no, that idea was shut down. Of course, the code says it's probably a good idea for the justices to not be politically motivated or to take partisan stances, but that is just a suggestion, something for them to consider.
All over America, people are in an uproar over the money that billionaires are spending to influence justices on the United States Supreme Court. Americans see that personal gifts to justices from right-wing billionaire sugar daddies like Harlan Crow and Federalist Society dark money expenditures are fundamentally perverting judicial ethics and undermining justice and the rule of law. Now, apparently responding to the national outcry over this ethics crisis on the court, our colleagues have called a hearing today about the influence that wealth exerts on the justice system, but they've gone off on a surprising and bizarre tangent. The problem, they say, is not the way the public is harmed when billionaires bankroll the private lives of ethically challenged Supreme Court justices. The real problem is that giant corporations are harmed when Americans injured by toxic torts or environmental crimes receive contributions from donors to help them bring personal injury or class action lawsuits.
It's obviously very sad when a handful of people who are supposed to be the most just and the most ethical in all the land cannot be trusted to be either just or ethical. But I almost don't want to blame them. Why did we ever expect to be able to hand over so much power with little to no oversight, apart from an effectively defunct system of checks and balances, with little to no threat of removal from that most high position, without attracting or enabling or creating corruption on that elite bench? These are protected individuals. There is no one above them. The president cannot even tell them what to do. The worst that can happen is that Congress can sort of get around the court's decisions if it really wants to. But to the individuals sitting on the bench, they can be impeached, but the last time that happened was in 1804 during the Thomas Jefferson administration. However, that guy was acquitted by Congress and he was never actually removed from the bench. In 1969, a justice resigned before he could be impeached, but in our nation's history, that's really it. If Supreme Court justices feel and act as if they are invincible, it's because they have good reason to believe that they are. The only real point of accountability they have to contend with is public opinion, and if they want to ignore that, they literally could just ignore it. Why should they care if they're well liked by the American people? We didn't vote for them. They're never going to be up for re-election. They will never have to run a campaign or appeal to the public in an effort to keep their jobs. It's been this way for hundreds of years. Is that going to change now, especially when we've got a conservative Congress and executive coming in next month? The only reason they cave now with this ethics code, which is really the least that they could have done, is because overall faith in the institution of the Supreme Court was and is faltering. This weak code that they served up as an appeasement to an enraged public is hardly going to quell the distrust and disrespect that the court has earned. I spoke in another video about how people are simply going to stop recognizing and respecting the role and significance of these institutions. And when that happens, anything goes, all right? That's it for me. If you got anything out of this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks.